Hello everybody, welcome back to episode 6 of Sound Design September. Today we're looking into this bass sequence over here. Now these basses are a little bit more progressive than the music that I normally make. So I'm taking inspirations from artists like Omiki, Blastoyz and Interactive Noise. What I'm going to do is I'm going to explain all 3 of the patches that we currently heard. And then I want to synthesize maybe 1 or 2 stereo layers to make it a little bit more interesting. So just jumping into the first patch over here, this is what we have. Just like the last episode, our main bass component is based on the Icanus kick waveform over here, but we have a separate sub over here as well. The reason for that is this sub bass is kind of weak in comparison to the second and third harmonic here. So I wanted a little bit more bite out of that. And then in the third oscillator, we have this waveform over here, which is just a saw wave with a lower few harmonics removed. This is the stereo layer. That is why you also see 2 voices of unison and some detune here. And that is why this also has a random phase position as opposed to this one, which has a very precise position in the way that the transient happens almost immediately at the start of the sound. Of course, that then goes into our filter, which is being modulated by this shape over here. The other 2 LFOs are used for volume control. This is the one for the sub bass, and then we have also one for the main oscillator over here. And in terms of the synthesis part, that's everything that is going on in here. So later we're going to have to take a look into the processing, which is a huge part of the way that you get this sound. But first, I want to go into the second patch over here. Now this is actually the exact same patch, but instead of using 8 notes like we were in the first patch for the LFOs, we're using 16 notes here. Of course, all of these are also set to envelope, meaning that they're just going to trigger once. And that makes controlling these modulations and syncing them to the time of your notes a lot easier than using, for example, an envelope. Which means that we're now going into the final patch, which is sliding bassline, just like in the last video. Now also just like in the last video and all of the other videos in this series, you can find all of these presets up on my Patreon page. So if you want to support the channel, you'll get some amazing patches for that in return. But the third patch looks like this. As you can see, it's very, very simple. I didn't even bother to change the basic waveform over here. And the reason why that is the case is because I wanted something really warm. When it comes to a lot of the processed bassline wavetables that we tend to use, say for example the Icanus kick over here, these have a less nice distribution of their lower harmonics here. So you're losing a lot of warmth when you're using them, especially at higher wavetail positions. But even at lower ones, if we compare the Icanus kick over here, this shape over here, to our basic saw wave, you can see that this is a much smoother roll-off. Now that shouldn't mean that you never should use any waveform like this one over here. Of course, having the processing already in the oscillator is a massive benefit, which I've talked about before on this channel. It is just going to depend on the tonality that you're after in terms of your bassline. But in this case, I wanted a really warm bassline, so I went with the basic saw wave over here. And there's really 3 things that we're doing in terms of the modulation. Again, we're modulating the volume over here, as well as the filter cutoff. And then the third thing that we're modulating is actually the pitch over here. So you can see how that is going to look in the mod matrix. And this is where we get the pitching effect from this particular bass sound. So this is how you get that kind of gliding effect, which you can hear better if I turn up the volume modulation. Of course, you would never hear a sliding bass like this, but like this. So that first part of the sliding bass is cut off and you only get the kind of last part of the swooping down until it gets to the key of the track, which I've left for the final 16 notes of the beat. So that is the sound design. Let's have a look into the processing. The first chain is really easy. We just have an EQ on both of the plucky basses and not on the sliding bass. But the main processing is going to come in here. Here we have some more EQ, mainly to scoop out the mid-range. So without that scoop, we get something like this. This can sound a lot warmer, but what I often hear is these bass sounds being kind of deep. Now, I actually recently had a conversation with Subject Ultra, one of my mates on my label, and he suggested that I should do this thing less, because it can negatively translate to festival systems. So I think if I had to revise this processing chain, what I would do is I would probably up this a little bit to get kind of halfway in between the effect that we just heard. The next stage of processing is the M stereo generator over here. This is the process that I use to stereonize the transients. So this is a very small detail and you're not going to hear it on phone if that's a mono speaker. It just adds a little bit of noisy character to just the highest frequencies, which are obviously only going to be in the transient. Then we have M Dynamics MB over here, which is controlling the different volumes in 4 different bands. What I do tend to do is set this to linear phase mode. As you can see over here, I'm using the analog linear phase mode over here. And that means that we get no phase shift from this multiband. This is just there to do the actual compression, which you can see I'm using on all 4 of the bands. And for all 4 of the bands, we're just basically trying to shave off a little bit of it to glue all 4 frequency bands a little bit more together. We see like a small transient over here. Just 1 dB of compression up here. Here you can see we're also doing just a little bit of compression. This one has a little bit of a longer attack. That means that this frequency range is going to get a little bit more punchy as well through the dynamics just kind of kicking in a little bit late. And the same is true for a sub bass, which you can see has just a tiny bit of compression on it when the 8th note is playing. Next up, we have the reason why this final bassline over here can use 2 voices of unison, meaning that even the low frequencies are going to be stereo. As you can see, we're mainly using it to mono the lowest frequencies, but we're also exciting some of the other frequencies. So this is basically just crafting our final stereo image. And this is really what makes sure that the sub bass and the lowest frequencies are going to be mono compatible, which is of course very important. And then finally, I have a basic limiter over here by kilohertz. And this is just again to shave off some of the highest peaks to just glue all of the sounds a little bit more together. So that is how we make the basses. Let's get into adding a little bit of extra interest into them with some stereo layers. Now this is really where you can take this kind of idea to the next level. This is something that I hear a lot in different Blastoyz and interactive noise tracks mainly. So what we want to do is we want to get a really strong tone out of this. Right now, of course, we just have a saw wave. So let's make this a little bit more interesting by adding another oscillator and using the random all over here to randomize the phases of all of the harmonics. It's going to go through filter together with oscillator B, of course, and then we'll turn it down a little bit and set up our basic shape. This is just going to be the starting point over here for our stereo layer. Of course, we don't have any stereo yet, and we want to set this up probably 1/8 so that it can layer on the first preset. Something like that is nice. And then we can distort this a little bit. Let's actually go with asymmetrical because it creates saw wave harmonics. Let's compress that. And of course, our stereo layer isn't really stereo yet, so let's add hyper dimension here. Mainly going to focus on the dimension because I don't really like the sound of the hyper most of the time. Of course, because this is a stereo layer, we don't really want those lower frequencies in here. And we want to probably get rid of the volume once we're done playing the note. So 1/8 envelope, lower the volume, and we just replace it with the modulation. And what I'm going to do on this pattern is I'm going to play it every first beat on the offbeat. So we'll just duplicate that over for the whole pattern. I do realize that I didn't explain the MIDI pattern yet. As you can see, we have 2 variations, one over here and one over here. This is of course 2 bars. So we have the 8th note bass playing in the first beat and the rolling bass line in the 3rd beat. And you can see that it's just playing 2 notes on the offbeat, 1 and 2. And then on the 2nd beat, in the first bar, we have the slide bass, and in the 2nd bar, we have another offbeat bass. So there's going to be some offbeat basses that aren't going to have this layer, which could be really interesting. We can make another layer for the rolling bass line. So that is going to go on the 3rd beat. We can basically just copy over the MIDI if we want to save a little bit of time here. And then again, I'm going to go into Serum. In this case, I want a little bit of a lighter sound, so I'm only going to go with the randomized phases. If we randomize the phases, you can see that we're losing, generally speaking, a lot of volume in the lower harmonics. So we're going to get a brighter sound out of that. Again, we'll just set up our basic envelope over here. In fact, we can generate a bit more stereo wave by using note and random here. And then just setting it up like this. Maybe a little bit of randomness is nice. Then we set up our volume again. So right now we have something that sounds like this. And as you can imagine, we need to distort this and make this a lot more aggressive. What could be cool is to do it like this. Maybe up this curve a little bit. something like that. Let's bring out some higher frequencies here. Remove the lower frequencies that we don't need. And then finally, what we can do is we can actually lower the attack stage a little bit in volume. Because we have that distortion going on, we really don't need a lot of volume going into that. And of course, our main bass is already going to have a transient. We want to probably have this close a little bit faster. We can add another filter after this to get a little bit more of a plucky feeling. Let's duplicate this over every bar. And now our final sound is going to sound something like this. Now that's it. That is everything that I want to show you. As you can imagine, there's a lot more that you can do in terms of the settings that you would use, the processing that you would use, and how you would play the MIDI and all that kind of stuff. What I wanted to do with this video is just show you a basic idea, mainly based around the sound design, but I felt like it wasn't fair talking just about the sound design, so a little bit of the processing, because it's so important, would also need to be included in there. So that means that we're now at the end of the video. Again, I will remind you that if you want to use all of these patches in your tracks, you can find them on my Patreon page. Another way of supporting my channel is by watching some more of my content, so there will be 2 videos up on the screen for you to choose from. So just pick one and enjoy, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.